This story continues from day 27, Luminous, and contains some strong language. Day 28, Reverberation. I want to believe that anything is possible, young Carlo had said to his new master that day, standing with the great hall of the palace behind him. Now, all these years later, the palace was behind him once again, as he stood on the crest of a hill, looking down at the mass of the Habsburg army that had arrived to take it. Such a force seemed impossible to him now. The silvery carapaces of thousands of armoured men were interspersed with flecks of red sashes and their sickly yellow and black standards hanging limp in the windless air. The neat rows were so distinct, even across so many warriors, the only unruly movement coming from some of the many impatient horses, flicking ahead or stepping aside to shift their weight. The discipline of the enemy was eerie. Carlo took some solace in the fact that a battle was not inevitable today. The main field general had ridden out some time ago with an entourage to discuss terms with the opposing side. Such diplomacy had clearly failed so far, meaning Carlo and half the principality had been marched across the country and woken in the dark today, but it was always worth a last attempt. Also, Carlo was chief engineer, which meant that even if defeat was to be their fate, he would not see combat, and almost certainly leave the field before falling into the hands of those fanatics. The general returned, his party throwing up a small cloud of dust. He had a thick black beard over a dull steel chestplate, which was intersected by a white-painted cross, running shoulder to shoulder and neck to navel. His expression was dark. "Those fuckers! Those obstinate fuckers!" he spat as he swung off his horse. "They'll make us do this to them." The faces around Carlo were grave. He wasn't sure why. Most of these higher-ups wouldn't get anywhere near a fight either. He knew the general would, though. His frustration did not come from fear, however. The general was a fierce man, a harsh leader, but Carlo knew he truly wished to sue for peace. "Artisan, follow me!" The general turned, without checking to see that Carlo had heard. The prince had been quite clear that Carlo's work was so important he technically outranked everyone else on the field today. It seemed no one had thought to inform the general of that. Carlo had to step into an almost run to keep up. A little way down from their vantage point, the general led them to a wide, flat shelf that sat in the hillside. There, in the gravel, stood the reason Carlo was here. A wooden trebuchet, as high as a 3-story house and a hinged throwing arm even longer than that. He was supposed to have had 2, maybe even 3 ready before their next encounter, but this was the only one they had managed to assemble in time. It was pristine, but according to most, already obsolete. The concept was already over 200 years old, and he knew the enemy would have cannoni, as did his own side, which were far more maneuverable and could fire more often. But it was what the trebuchet fired that was Carlo's masterpiece. "I see the Romans left this lying around," quipped the general, although he wasn't smiling. "Well, tried and tested, I'm sure you'll agree, General," said Carlo. "Yes, by bis nonno," his great-grandfather. "Then I'm sure your men will have no trouble operating it," parried Carlo. The general flicked a look at him, calculating what he could get away with one so impertinent. He settled on a sneer. "Just make sure it works. Il Principe believes this thing could take the day for us." As well he might, thought Carlo. Trebuchets had long been used to fling massive rocks or diseased corpses at castles during sieges, but this one was armed with a far more complex payload. For years, Carlo had been perfecting a delivery system that turned the explosive power of cannon inside out. Instead of loading a charge behind a cannonball that sent it forward, Carlo put the charge inside the ball, which would detonate on the enemy and blast them from within. A further innovation he had concocted was to prime the ball with a timed fuse which, if calculated correctly, could cause it to erupt just over the heads of the Habsburgs, sending hundreds of triboli, four-pronged metal spikes, through armour and horses, and littering the battlefield for anyone fortunate enough to avoid the initial blast. Their tests on small herds of goats had been stomach-churning in their success. A horn sounded. The general looked out at the invading force, some 3 times the size of their own. Carlo prayed wordlessly that his theories were correct. As he skittered back up the path to the hilltop, the general was already mounted and making his way down to his men. Carlo watched in silence as the 2 front lines faced off against each other and pulled his cloak around himself. There was a chill in the air. And then it started. Each line ran forward, followed a split second later by roars that had taken a little longer to reach Carlo. The distance between the opposing fronts could not have been more than 100 meters, but it seemed to take a lifetime for them to close it. But close it they did. A heavy thwoomph went up as hundreds of men and horses hit each other at full pelt. The dust rose from the mayhem as if to spare the innocence of the onlookers up on the hill. Through the cloud, it was near impossible to make out individual leaders of groups. Carlo turned his attention to his trebuchet. Over the crest of the hill, he could make out that the counterweight was already up. They must be about to fire. With a creaking swoosh, the arm reached up to heaven and pointed at the battlefield, sending a black sphere into the fray. It sailed up and over, the trajectory leading further back behind the line so as not to injure the prince's own men. It disappeared through the cloud of dust, and Carlo waited and waited. Nothing happened. He told himself that the distance was such that perhaps it wouldn't be possible to hear the detonation. He looked down to the catapult. They were readying to fire again, and he held his breath. Up it went. The range was perfect. The calculations they had made worked. The ball headed towards the enemy, and this time the air was clear enough for Carlo to see where it landed. As he strained his eyes, it seemed to knock a man and horse to the ground, upending a few on foot after that. But no explosion. Carlo waited. Perhaps the fuses were timed wrong, or worse, the powder was bad. Still no explosion. The noble shot him disgusted looks as he cursed and ran back down the slope to the trebuchet. As he arrived, the general skidded alongside him on his horse. There was blood in his beard. "What the fuck is going on? It's doing nothing!" His eyes terrified Carlo. He was glad they were on the same side. The fuses should..." As Carlo said the word, he saw the fuses lying in the small wooden boxes they had used to transport them, untouched. Now it was his turn to stare with such rage that the boy who had been tasked with placing the fuses paled. He flinched as Carlo strode towards him, and then straight past to grab a fuse. "Load it, now!" bellowed Carlo, as the general looked on. The small team ratcheted the mechanism to lift the counterweight, slack rope coiling around the stitched leather sling that would cradle the explosive. Carlo hurried the 2 men who rolled the ball into place as he shaved off a minute length of fuse to account for the advance in the field he calculated the enemy had made. He delicately inserted it into the hand-bored hole and, seeing that the team were ready, lit it, slid it inside the shell, and smeared a lump of pork fat across the hole, sealing it in. The team leader had fully ceded control to Master Carlo now. "3, 2, 1, loose!" As the triggerman pulled on the release catch, the whole structure lurched and swayed under the shifting force. The metal payload was heaved up off the ground, swung around in an arc, and sent out to its fate. Carlo and the general had time to step to the edge of the outcrop as the ball flew. The sun was high now, and the tiring Italianate forces meant there was less dust than there had been before, the line worryingly closer than it had been. But no dust would have hidden the blast. A few lines back from the front, the ball exploded in an orange flash. A horrific circle rippled away from the centre, men and horses screaming. The force was such that Carlo could make out a round collective bloodstain on the ground, 30 men wide. A reverberation of his own young voice quivered in his mind, a dream shared with his master, long dead. "I want to believe that anything is possible." His master would never have dreamed of this.